Starliner Media. Starliner Media presents Music Night at the Majestic with your host, Michael Boswell.
All right, it's time once again for Music Night at the Majestic, and with us tonight, Monte Warden. Monte, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Michael. Thank y'all for having me.
Oh, it's great to see you again. Actually, I know you won't recall this, but on a show that I used to do, you were kind enough to do an interview for it when you were playing the Park West in Chicago, opening up for Jimmy Dale.
Okay, so this is what I do remember that. This is like 94, 95, I think.
Yeah, exactly, 94.
That was a great tour. We toured with Gilmore like for 6, maybe 8 months. But the Park West gig was like one of those just incredible special shows that, you just remember. That was really cool. Well, hello again. Let's, we talk 28 years, whether we need to or not, so.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'll call you in 2030 or 2050 or whatever it's going to be. We'll do this again.
Right on.
Anyway, well, I'll tell you, your career has been very, is diverse. Yeah, your music, your influences. You're one of those guys who wears your influences well without blatantly imitating them.
Well, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you very much for that. My influences, my primary influences, I would say, as artistically, it would be, Buddy Holly, certainly the Everly Brothers, certainly Don Everly as a lead singer. And I love Bobby Darin. I love Dean Martin. I, love Sinatra. But the thing is about all those cats, particularly Holly and Don Everly, they were so original. The best way to honor them is to find your own voice because they found their own voice. And where I've been blessed is I've always been able to write good songs that other people wanted to listen to.
Well, as we've discussed on this show many times before, yeah, to me, the key is to incorporate all those things that influenced you, because we've all been influenced by others.
Right.
The key is to take those and create something new with it.
Well, yeah, I mean, because I think that's how art progresses. Any art, any medium, whether it's music or literature or painting or sculpture, acting, is we're all standing on the shoulders of the people that came before us. And that's why, I think that the one constant, and I can speak of it because my belief is it's God-given. You can't take any credit for it, is you have to be talented to be able to do that. But the thing about talent is it cannot be given. It cannot be taken. It cannot be traded, bought, sold, transferred. And that's why I think it's just a God-given gift, whether you're either born with it or you're not. And that's why for me, it's always been so unusual that when people talk about others appropriating someone else's talent or culture or something, I feel that's disrespectful to the person that has that talent, because you have to have the talent to be able to express that in any way, shape, or form. It's Bob Marley certainly never writes Stir It Up or Three Little Birds without being obsessed with Buddy Holly's Words of Love. But he also had to be Bob Marley talented enough to write Stir It Up and Three Little Birds, or like the Beatles
Exactly.
With Holly or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, Holly, yeah, you and I are both, more than a little fans of Buddy's music. But he's one of those guys whose influence permeates so many kinds of music, even artists that on the surface you wouldn't think about, that influence is there.
Well, I think Holly permeates. Well, basically every time a young kid plugs in a Fender Stratocaster into a Fender amp, they may be unaware of the fact that they've just been influenced by Buddy Holly. Holly was the first major star to play a Stratocaster and play one exclusively, and so we know from the few interviews that survived that, Hendrix was a hugely influenced by Holly. every time you see a three-piece band, whether it's the Police or Green Day, that's a Buddy Holly influence. And certainly any talk of the outlaw movement that mentions Waylon Jennings because of Waylon's, personal relationship with Buddy and the fact that Buddy's discovered Waylon, but Buddy was Waylon's mentor. So any talk of the outlaw movement of country from the 70s and all that influenced, but later on it being, of course, Dwight Yoakam and George Strait and Randy Travis. And, so Buddy is just everywhere. And there is no, well, I don't want to say there is no, but the Beatles, the Stones, the Who, Clapton, Elvis Costello, that whole group of British artists, I'm not saying they would never have happened because they were so talented, but their music sounds a whole lot different without Buddy Holly.
Exactly. I remember Waylon saying that the thing that he learned from Buddy was it all comes down to the music. Get yourself a good groove and build it from there.
Well, and the thing was with you look at Waylon, you look at the way Waylon held a guitar, and he held it just like Buddy did, where it was almost like a machine gun. I mean, it like a weapon, because that's the way Holly treated it. And where I was blessed in '89 and then again in '90 or '91 to tour a little bit with Waylon, and Waylon. Now they talk about him being quite a contrarian. He was always as sweet as sugar to me. He could not have been a sweeter man. But he said about 5 words a week. He was not a big conversationalist. But once he realized that I wanted to talk about Buddy Holly and not necessarily Waylon Jennings, though I was a huge fan, Waylon had me up on the bus several times, and he told me one thing, and I'll clean it up because it involves some pretty salty language. But I asked Waylon, I said, are there any stories about Buddy that you haven't told in interviews? And Waylon said, well, Hoss, I got about 100 of those, and I'm not going to tell you a damn one. But what he said here, because this would have been '89, it is so sweet. It speaks to what a good Texas boy Waylon was in the way he prefaced this story. He said, I'll tell you one story, but you have to promise not to repeat it as long as Buddy's mother's alive, which is just so sweet. I mean, mm-hmm. And just like, I don't know if you've seen that picture online of where Buddy's shooting the finger right in front of Waylon's face in that photo booth. Yeah. And Waylon did not release that till after Mrs. Holly had passed. So, it's just so sweet. But anyhow, so Waylon said that it was the first night of the winter dance party. It was January 23rd, 1959. And, they were at the Fiesta Ballroom, and he saw Buddy was on the side of the stage. And not a lot of people know this. Waylon Jennings and Tommy Allsup and Carl Bunch, they were the band for all of the acts on that. So Waylon was fixing to go on stage and be Frankie Sardo and the Dion and the Belmonts group, and Holly be on like an hour later. And he said Holly was in the wings, and he was looking out. The place was sold out. And Buddy hadn't been on the road in about 4.5, 5 months. Didn't know how popular he still was, and of course, the place was sold out. And he said Buddy was just looking out at the audience, and he was just talking to himself. And he said, I didn't know if he was praying or what, Hoss. I didn't know. And he said, so I went up behind him, and he said, I wanted to hear what Buddy was saying. He said, but you didn't really go up to Buddy before the show. He was real serious. And he said, so Waylon went up to Buddy behind him. And he said, you know what he was saying over and over again, Hoss? And I said, no, sir, I don't. He was just looking out at that crowd, and he was going, you lucky MFers, you lucky MFers. He said, and they were too. I mean, I didn't know Buddy Holly even knew the word darn, and here he was, of course, 22-year-old kid, a big star, But I'll tell you one other story about Waylon with Buddy, and particularly in this era of lockdowns and COVID and musicians not playing or going out. We were up in Canada, and we were playing this festival, and we were Waylon's opening act, and the Wagoneers were, and there'd just been a torrential rain, Michael. I mean, like for days, and they were expecting about 40,000 people, and like 3,000 people had showed up, and they were talking to Waylon in the tent where the promoter was, and he said, "Mr. Jennings, if you want to cancel this show, we certainly understand. We'll pay you and all that. And Waylon looked right at me, and he said, then he turned to the promoter and he said, "Hoss, we picked the show the very night Buddy got killed. I reckon we can get rained on a little bit." And man, you figure, you think about that, Michael. Those guys pulled into Moorhead, Minnesota, February 3rd, and were probably amongst the last people in the world that knew Buddy was killed, because they'd been in the bus all day.
Right.
And yet they got out of that bus and they picked that show. So for the rest of my life, I was 23 when Waylon said that in front of me. I have never canceled a show. I've had a lot of stuff. I've had life go on like other people do, but if there's one person out there that they've had life go on and yet they found a clean shirt to put on and come to my show, I get out there and pick. I don't think you cancel dates because you're scared. Certainly you never cancel date because you're scared or you're tired or you're sad. I mean, I understand if you're too sick to go on. I've been blessed that that's never happened. You never want to get your audience sick. I get that. But the fact that Waylon just said they picked that show the very night Buddy got killed has just stuck with me for 30 years. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, as you said, Waylon is one of the truly the nicest people I ever had a chance to spend time with.
Right. And he has a reputation that he wasn't. It's so odd to me.
Yeah. I'll tell you, the first time that I met him was doing an interview. Yeah. Much like this. And I asked him a question, and he was being very polite with the answers and everything. And then I asked him a question about Herb Alpert having signed him to A&M. And he was surprised that I knew about that.
Right.
And then from that point on, he was just the nicest guy. And, we had a lot of good times after that. Yeah. But it was just like there was when he heard something that, told him, hey, this isn't just another, routine deal.
Right.
There's actually caring going about the music here. He just went off. It was, say, could have been nicer, telling stories like what you're saying, not those stories, but just super, super nice.
Well, and also he loved, he would talk about his time on Brunswick Records and when he was at JD's in Phoenix, and then when A&M Records signed him. A&M signed 3 country acts their entire history: Waylon Jennings, Graham Parsons, and the Wagoneers. And we were on the road with Waylon, and we were talking about being on A&M and how much he loved Herb Alpert and Jerry Moss. And I said, Waylon, because Herb and Jerry, when Waylon went to RCA, they said, we'll give you 5% of the company if you'll stay with A&M. And he, at that time, they didn't have the lot. 5% of the company was still in Herb's garage, and so he left. And so I was just talking to him, and I said, I just read that Polygram bought A&M for $200 million. And he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, Hoss, you could have gone all day without telling me that.
Oh, that's funny.
But I'll tell you something else about that's a tribute to you, because he knew you knew what you were talking about. And I know that Waylon had that, reputation, as I said, for being a bit of a contrarian. And I was talking to some people that worked very closely with him for a long time, part of his management team. And they said Waylon was just a sweetheart, but he couldn't stand being around artists whose records sucked. He said, so anytime we heard somebody say, oh, Waylon was rude, they go, yeah, you don't make good records.
Well, I'll tell you, it was shortly before that conversation with Waylon. Billy Joe Shaver had been on the show. And Billy Joe was telling the story about getting Waylon to write his songs and how he threatened he was gonna, whoop Waylon's butt if he didn't record them. And Waylon just started laughing. And he's like, well, I ought to, he's like, I like to see him try that.
Right.
Next time I see him, we're going to have some words.
And the thing is, I mean, Waylon, because, he was a big guy, he was probably 6'1". Billy Joe was just a tiny little guy, but those are the guys you don't want to mess with, like he, before he shot that fella, he just said, where do you want it? So.
Well, I'll tell you, there was a time where was doing an interview with Billy Joe. He was playing a club in Chicago, and because schedules got changed up, I ended up having to record him in the alley behind the club. So we're out in the alley, and I borrowed a microphone from a friend that he was brand new. It was like a $3,000 microphone. I had one of those back when DAT tapes, digital audio tapes, were brand new and recorders were expensive. So I'm standing in this alley in Chicago with this expensive microphone, this expensive recorder, talking with Billy Joe. And he's leaning up against the van. He's got his hat on. It's, tilted down like, always. Well, as we're talking, this drunk comes walking down the sidewalk, looks over, and he recognizes Billy Joe's silhouette. So he comes running up to Billy Joe, all excited. Well, Billy Joe's focused on what he's telling me. So he's not paying attention until all of a sudden a peripheral vision says, hey, there's somebody running at me. Billy Joe spins around. He draws back, and the guy's like, whoa, Billy Joe, I'm just a fan. I just want to say hi. He's like, so Billy Joe signed something, the guy's shirt or CD, whatever it was. And as he walks off, Billy Joe turns to me and goes, dang fool's going to get himself killed doing that in an alley in Chicago.
One time I was in France and we were picking this festival and Billy Joe was on the festival too. And it was when Eddie, his late son, was picking guitar with him. And so I was talking to Billy Joe. We knew each other a little bit, and we knew that we were both, we lived 70 miles from one another here, and here we were in France to go over and actually have a meal, So this gorgeous girl walked in. I mean, just this stunning girl walked in. And Billy Joe was talking to him, and I went, good night. Look at that woman. And he goes, yeah, that's Eddie's wife. He said, you want to go tell Eddie how beautiful you think his wife is? And I said, no, sir, I don't. He goes, yeah, you probably don't want to do that. And I may have said not beautiful. I may have said something else, but anyway, he was always just a great guy, sweetheart, and always ready to laugh. But boy, he had that hair trigger temper. But I never saw it pointed at anybody that didn't need it pointed at.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I never did either. And every time he would come to town, he'd always take the time to be on the show and chat and talk, and we'd hang out, what have you. So, but actually, I was gonna use the A&M tie with Waylon back to you, the Wagoneers.
Right.
Yeah. Because you guys played the first South by Southwest festival.
Right.
And
Very first one.
Yeah. And then you guys got signed to A&M the following year. Was it the fact that they'd seen you at South by Southwest that led to that?
Well, no, they didn't see us, but so the South by Southwest was March of '87. And I reckon A&M signed us in August of '87. But right after South by Southwest, just every record label wanted us, and we kind of, back then with there were just very few record labels. There were major label records, and there weren't that many independent labels, and there certainly weren't any self-releases, back then. And we were just kind of just this hot thing, and all these labels had bidding wars, but it was all out of Nashville. And once you got into the, RCA and Columbia and Capitol and Liberty and all those Nashville labels, they were already, even before we even signed with them, talking about ways that they could, help us, which means just change us. And the thing is, I don't mean anything disparaging towards, those labels. They knew how to sell those records. And their whole thing was, you come into our machine and we will help you, sell records you'll make records the way we know how to, that sound the way we know how they ought to sound, and get into this machine. And I was just very discouraged by that because I was the reason, my songs that I'd written everything, my songs are the reason why everybody was so excited. So I couldn't understand as a 20-year-old why somebody'd be so excited about a group and then immediately want to change them. And then at just the 11th hour, we were fixing to sign with Columbia, CBS Nashville, which is right before they were bought by Sony. And we were just fixing to do it, and just A&M swooped in at just the last second, and they made me a promise and put it in writing that I would have complete creative control over our records. Whatever I wanted to put on the record was what went on the record. And they also gave me assurances in writing that provided the producer was happy with it, that the guys that we would actually play on our records, and so many of your listeners may be unaware that most records you hear don't have the actual band, actually playing on the record. It's usually a bunch of studio musicians. And there, once again, not to take an off ramp, but there's that Holly influence. He was the very first one to have a self-contained band that wrote and recorded and produced their own records. Elvis was probably the first one that the band you heard on the record was what you saw live, but Holly was the first one that wrote everything and did it that way. So A&M just gave me all of this and all this creative control. And at that point, then you just go, the money was all the same, and the labels in Nashville figured if they kept offering us more money, that I would acquiesce my creative control. And, I was 20 years old, and how many, silk suits and pointy shoes did I need, So I went with A&M because they promised to leave me the hell alone. And they did. Mr. Alpert said, I'm a big Wagoneers fan, and I think you know better than I do what a Wagoneers record ought to sound like. And man, he meant it. And he loved the Wagoneers albums, particularly the first one, Stout and High. He even played on it. And that was the very first time I ever produced anybody. I'm 20 years old and I'm producing Herb Alpert. And so it was just it was a special time. It was such a blessing to be on that label, because the thing that people forget so often, not you, of course, is that the A in A&M was Herb Alpert. He was an artist on that label. So he understood what an artist wants and needs and desires were, and also how to communicate with an artist if something else needed to be conveyed. And Mr. Alpert was brilliant at that.
Absolutely. Now, the first album, Stout and High.
Yes, sir.
So many tracks on that. In fact, we've got Stout and High right here.
That's how good.
I confess, the opening track, when you guys, when that album hit, it was like year 3 of the, we'll say, new wave of country artists coming.
That'd be about right. Yeah. About year 2.5, 3, Steve Earle called it the great credibility scare of the 1980s.
Yep, exactly. Well, after all the years of the country pop stuff,
right?
Yeah, and a lot of times country pop gets a very derisive attitude towards it, and it's like anything else. You could have some very well done country pop records, and then you've got some stuff that's just absolute schlock.
Sure, like anything else. I mean, most of the time, most music isn't worth remembering, and we don't remember most music.
Exactly. But that was with Steve and Dwight and Randy Travis, Ricky Skaggs,
George Strait. George Strait was a big part of that too.
All those artists, that was starting to. Then 86 was like the breakthrough year for what things. So when you came in, it was starting to get going, but you guys had such a fresh sound because you were able to keep one boot in the traditional camp, if you will, of honky tonk songs, but yet you had that edge to it. You had that Buddy Holly rock and roll edge to it.
Right.
Yeah. Which made it very fresh, but that also probably made it difficult for you guys to get airplay.
Well, yeah, I would say, the main thing, I think that, and once again, like anything else, particularly once some time has gone by, it's important to look at it contemporaneous to its time and not this time. And in 1988, a young country artist was 35 years old, and I'm 21. So I was so much younger by a lot. And I was the youngest guy in the band by a lot. The other guys were real young for country artists, and they were in their mid and late 20s. But I was just, I mean, when we first started picking, Michael, there were places I couldn't, there were clubs I couldn't go in. We'd pick our set, and then they would literally kick me out. I mean, particularly, first time that ever happened to me was at Fitzgerald's in Berwyn.
Okay, I saw you there several times, actually.
I was too young to be there, so Bill, I think, was just afraid, maybe somebody's going to, bust him. So I had to wait in the van, go out and pick our show. I think we were on a bus, and then had to go out after we'd picked, because I was a kid, So much of what was so different from us than any other artist, where we were so different from any other artist, was our youth, and also because the type of song, I wrote everything for the group. It was, I had just a youthful exuberance and all that, but also I hadn't lived very much, so I had very limited experiences of which I could write, the subject matter. But in regards to getting on the radio, it's true, we country radio didn't embrace us like that, like they maybe would have if we'd have been on a Nashville label. But having said that, if we'd been on a Nashville label, our records wouldn't have sounded that way. They would have sounded a bit more mainstream. But not to get too in the weeds about show business, but A&M Records had no country radio promotion apparatus. They were a rock and roll label. They knew how to get Police records on the radio and Janet Jackson records on the radio. And so they did a deal with RCA Nashville to have RCA promote our records to radio, which sounded great unless you were an RCA act, and all of a sudden the Wagoneers were getting your ads at radio. Your manager was going to raise holy hell, and that's exactly what happened. And so some of those other artists trying to break at that time, brilliant artists who deserve all of their success. I'm talking about Hall of Famers like Clint Black, Lori Morgan, but their management raised a lot of guff with RCA that they were working an artist from another label at that time. And, really, I'd only been in the music business about 5 seconds, and I saw it was the way it seemed to me was somebody's asking Ford to sell Chevys. How successful is that going to be? And that's exactly what it was radio wise. But in regards to, I would much rather have 2 albums that I made with my vision and my songs that I'm proud of. We were able to tour all we wanted. For 4 or 5 years, we picked 250 dates a year because live we were in demand. And I got to make my music my way, which was paramount, which was most important to me than anything else.
Well, that's always the catch. And there's always a catch to it. You can have this or you can have that, and you have to decide which is more important to you. Now, to me, having, a couple albums, as you said, that stand the test of time is much more important than money that's probably would have already been spent and long gone. Now, right. I can say that because I wasn't the one getting any money, but
I wasn't either.
However, the fact remains is after that money's gone, the music is still around.
Well, right. And thank you. And I'll say this, it's like, one of my dear friends has a very successful businessman. And he said that of all the things that are hard to get, money's the easiest one. You can always go make money. And so, and I've been very blessed, and I've had an extraordinary career where I have written big hits and sold millions of records as a songwriter, all of that. And, I feel, I have absolutely zero regrets on the choices that I made about my songs and my music and the course that it took. I know it was the right thing because, the people that I'll say this, everyone I've ever met that knows about the Wagoneers digs the Wagoneers. I've never met somebody that knew about the band and didn't dig those records. So, I'd rather have that.
Well, that plus you have to know that, if you do a deal where you're doing it just for the money and you're putting out product that you're not happy with, you're going to be miserable.
Right. Well, and I've had those deals later in my career, and you are miserable, and the money is spent. But having said all that, I'm 20 years old. I'm on this record label that I have so many A&M records in my home, and I bought a house, so it wasn't like I took some bargain basement deal. This was a rock and roll label paying rock and roll advances. So. Best of both worlds. It was really cool.
Yeah. Well, tell you what, getting back to the first album, some of those songs, the closer, All Night.
Yeah.
What a kicking tune that is.
Thank you. I wrote that when I was, that's the oldest song on that record. The first, I wrote All Night when I was maybe 17, and I wrote Stout and High when I was 18. But really, I was really turned on by, not to get too in the weeds about music, but the way Buddy Holly used the minor chord, the 6 minor in Maybe Baby, and he used it almost like the Beatles when they would use a minor chord, they would like announce that minor chord with authority. And the way Holly used it on Maybe Baby, he like slipped it in like it was a major chord. And it was just brilliant the way he did it. And I was also really turned on by the track of Ritchie Valens' Come On, Let's Go, which is, the thing about why was Ritchie on that tour? Because his idol was Buddy Holly. All those Ritchie Valens records sound like a kid that loves Buddy Holly, And so I was really just I was monkeying around with Come On, Let's Go, and then I was monkeying around with Maybe Baby, and you kind of put those two songs together and you get All Night. So, and that's really how that thing came to be, I reckon. I never thought about it until just this moment, but that's what it was.
Well, you guys did a video for I Want to Know Her Again, correct?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I think we did three videos off of Stout and High, and I think 2 off of Good Fortune, if I'm not mistaken. But yeah, I Want to Know Her Again was our first release. It was a hit record for us on the charts and video. It was like a top 40 record, but it was a top 5 video because we were young and cute, and also we were on a rock and roll label, Michael. So A&M wouldn't sneeze at paying $50,000 for a video when Nashville labels were paying literally $1,000 for their other videos shot actually on video, whereas A&M stuff was all shot on film. So it just looked better than anything else on CMT at the time, and we got to reap the rewards of that.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Good Fortune, the second album. Now, on that one, you got to work with some legendary musicians on that one, in addition to the band.
Yeah. Sleepy LaBeef is on that record, and Caton Roberts, and Glendi Hardin, who played piano for Elvis, and Emmylou, and Graham Parsons. And Glendi's very first job was driving Buddy Holly in the Cricket station wagon in a July of 1958 tour, because he was from Lubbock too. So anyway, we also got to pick with some of Elvis's background singers, Ed Enoch, Larry Strickland, guys that had sung background for Elvis in the 70s. So it was just the whole thing was, it was available to me, and I'd written these songs. I just said, why not?
Yeah. Well, when you went in to do the second album, what was your goal with that one? Because obviously, you showed growth as an artist, with the second disc. What was your goal? Was like, okay, we've already accomplished this much with Stout and High. Right. We're going in for the sophomore effort.
Well, it was an entirely different situation with the label. The A&R guy that signed us was this brilliant, legendary cat named David Anderley. He had been Sam Cooke's A&R guy at RCA. He ushered in all the early days of A&M. And so Mr. Anderley retired, And then this other cat, this guy named Steve Rabowski, took his place. He succeeded David. He by no means replaced him. And Steve was just he was young, and he was just not a very good A&R guy. And so that was the very first time in my career I kind of had meddling from the label, but not too much. And there were a lot of those songs, several of those songs on Good Fortune to me, because you have to remember, I'm 21, now I'm 22 years old. My voice is still changing a little bit. So the songs, I had written the songs in certain keys, which no longer really fit my voice because my voice was still getting deeper. So there were some of those instances. And then there was just, unbeknownst to us at the time, like not even till 30 years later, all of the rhythm section parts were replaced after we had left Nashville. And for me, the record had always, the only thing that sounded to me like the Wagoneers was Sit a Little Closer, the hit off the record. And that's the only song on the record that all four of us are playing. The Emery Gordy had to replace the drummer's parts because once they got into mixing, it just, they didn't sound right. They did not match what needed to happen. And therefore, if you're replacing the drums, you also have to replace the bass. And of course, Emery Gordy, being probably the world's greatest bassist, was able to quickly replace the bass parts. But I never knew that till 30 years later. But
wow,
to me, that's why the record just doesn't quite sound like a Wagoneers record. And what I found out in just about 5 years ago was the guys weren't playing on it, and I didn't know that. But I'm very proud of the record in regards to things like Por Favor, Senor, It's a Little Closer, Everybody Calls My Baby Honey, Test of Time. I think is probably the best song we ever recorded. But there are just some things that it just doesn't have the Wagoneers, what made us so special on Stoughton High. And it wasn't until we were researching stuff about the 2008 Universal Masters fire that we discovered in 2017 that we realized those cats the two guys weren't even playing on the record.
wow,
I know.
That's amazing.
Try from my perspective.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'll tell you, you followed that up with your first solo album.
Yeah.
Which for me, that album is on my Desert Island disc list.
Thank you.
Because I mean, you just knocked it out of the park on that one.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know there was a quote that I had seen somewhere. Somebody had said that it was like the lost Buddy Holly album that you didn't know existed.
Right. That was the Rolling Stone review. Was that? Yeah. Yeah.
And to me, that was a prime example, is what we were talking about before, where you can take your influences and then do something fresh.
Well, thank you.
And that's what that album is.
Well, thank you, Michael. That record was real important to me. Right after the Wagoneers broke up the first time, we're back again and rocking. But I was immediately signed to RCA Records with this huge deal, just tons of money and everything that was basically. I took the deal the Wagoneers didn't take in '88. I took it in '91. And I never recorded anything for RCA. I mean, not even an outgoing phone message, nothing. And they sat on me for 2 years and finally just bought me out of my contract. And I never understood why they even signed me. It never made any sense to me. I couldn't figure it out, but I had all this money. But I had lost all momentum to the Wagoneers that the Wagoneers had built up. And what I decided to do was, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make my record that I want to listen to. And it's going to sound a whole lot like Ricky Nelson and Don Everly and Buddy Holly. And I'm going to write those types of songs that I would want to pitch to Ricky Nelson in 1958 and Don Everly in 1960 and Buddy Holly in 1959. And I just want to make that record, use my guys, go in, record it all live. And I mean live. Like the two records I have made that are completely live, I feel are the two best things I've ever made. And that's my solo record and the Dangerous Few record, where, I mean, no overdubs, no nothing. We're up in the room just like Buddy Holly recorded. If you can do that, you should do that. You know, not everybody can, but I sing on pitch and the guys are great and all this stuff. So we went in and I made this record, and the only label that would put it out was this little old label in Austin called Watermelon, tiny little independent label. But I had enough money from my RCA settlement to hire the best publicists in the business. So the record got reviewed everywhere. Now, you don't know what a critic's going to say. You know, maybe spending that much money on the press wouldn't have been that smart a thing, but it was universally praised, and it got written about in Rolling Stone and Entertainment Weekly and USA Today and the Washington Post. It was their album of the year. It was the first time they'd ever listed an independent album as the album of the year. But the crowning glory of that crowning achievement of that record was in the year 2000, the New Musical Express, like the Great Britain's Rolling Stone, listed that album as one of the 100 greatest American albums of the 20th century. With
you got that fact scrolling across the screen right now.
Oh, fantastic! Oh, well, it's like, you know, and it was wild because they weren't in any order. So there's my record next to Pet Sounds in Nebraska and the Chirping Crickets, and I'm just going, are you kidding me? So it was, and it also forever instilled in me, only make a record when you have something to say, and only say it the way you want to say it, you know?
Yep, absolutely. Now, you mentioned Rick Nelson.
Yeah.
I am a firm believer that he never got the credit he deserved
absolutely
for his
never
records and for his impact on music.
Well, one of the most brilliant vocalists, one of the most just effortless vocalists that I think to have ever lived. Such great phrasing. You know, if he had been not as good looking, I think he would be so much more respected. But people assumed, because he was so beautiful to look at, and he was on TV every week because of his family's TV show, that those records were popular because of that. Those records were popular because they were stunning.
They're great records.
And he discovered James Burton as a guitar player. He was the first one to ever record Johnny Burnett and Dorsey Burnett songs and have them be hits. You know, he was the first guy to record Baker Knight songs. You know, Baker Knight wrote Lonesome Town for him. And Rick Nelson invented country rock. There is no Jackson Browne, there's no Eagles, there's no Linda Ronstadt. None of that happens without Rick Nelson and the Stone Canyon Band. And he gets none of that credit, even though members of the Stone Ponies and the Eagles and Graham Parsons groups were all at one point members of the Stone Canyon Band. And Rick got absolutely no credit. I mean, it's weird. How can you say somebody doesn't get any credit who's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, who's, you know, so has achieved so many things, but he is not listed in the same breath as Holly and the Everly Brothers and some of those other art, you know, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, some of those other artists from the 50s. And his influence is just as profound. And the fact that he didn't write those songs doesn't matter, because, you know, Elvis didn't write anything. Sinatra didn't write anything. It's you do not have to be a songwriter to be a great expressionist. And Rick Nelson's records are brilliant, man.
Agree 100%.
Good for you.
I'll tell you, getting back to your first solo. Let's talk about a few of the songs on there. Don't Know a Thing. What's the backstory on that one?
Me and my co-producer on that record, they produced the record with Dave McNair, Moss Palermo, who also co-produced the Dangerous Few record. Me and Moss and Billy Brad Fordham, who played bass on that, plays bass in the Wagoneers. Well, we were writing that song in Nashville. We were in a hotel there, and I didn't quite feel I knew we had the Holly stuff covered, but I didn't think in regards to this record, we had quite nailed the Bobby Fuller 4 influence. I said, I need like a Bobby Fuller 4 song for this record. And so that's what we were going, just one more aggressive than Buddy Holly and the Crickets, one little bit more of an edge to it. And so we just started monkeying around with those grooves. And then Brad just was able to spit out that brilliant bridge where it goes to the minor and the one. Is it right to think about you all the time? Then he goes to the chord that's in Peggy Sue, the F. Is it wrong to want to make you mine? And then we knew we had pretty much a perfect pop a la 1966 song. And then it just became an anchor for our shows. I don't know the sequence, but that's the first song on the record, I think.
I believe it is, but let me.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. I mean, we knew that was going to be just a sound defining tune. And it was everything that I'd had in my vision of just having, yes, the Holly stuff, but one little bit West Texas mix in there. So
yeah,
there we go.
How about Forever From Now On?
That was I was monkeying around with using the 2 minor in place of the 4 chord, not to get too in the weeds. And I wrote that song about my oldest son, Van. And Van was born in 1989 and he had Down syndrome, and I didn't know he had Downs till he was born. And I was just overcome with just incredible just love and affection and feeling so protective of him. And that song, the first line is, there is something special about you and every little thing you say and do, because everything he did just cracked me up. So was the impetus for writing that song.
Yeah, that's good. How about Give My Heart a Break?
That was, I'd had that hook when I was, for years, that I carried that hook around with me for years. That was the very first time I ever had a hook that I didn't just immediately go right. That was a kind of a rookie mistake that a young writer will make, is they might have a killer hook and then they feel the need to immediately go write it. And sometimes what happens is then you've got a great hook, trapped in a crappy song. So I didn't make that mistake. So I carried that around, and I was always trying to write a country song, like a real traditional, like Wagoneers type tune. And then one day I was outside and I was just monkeying around with just that chord progression that's on Give My Heart a Break. And I just how long is forgetting gonna take? I wish your memory'd give my heart a break. And I realized, oh, this wants to be a Buddy Holly song. So I just kind of let the song dictate how it wanted to be written. And it had never dawned on me that very Nashville hook was going to wind up in like such a Buddy Holly sounding tune. But we made a video with that thing, and it was very successful on CMT, and VH1 showed it a couple times, and it moved a lot of records, a lot of units for that record.
Yeah. Well, like I say, that album is one of my favorites. So
thank you.
Yeah. Well, when you are a Buddy Holly fanatic and Rick Nelson, Bobby Fuller, it's like it is that description that it's like one of those lost albums that you never knew existed until you do. And when you hear it, it's like, wow, this is like a kindred spirit here, So
well, thank you. I mean, and that's another one of those things. It's like everybody that's ever heard that record really, really digs that record. And what I'm hoping to do in the next couple years, I want to do it smartly and I want to do it properly. But over the past few years, I've been able to acquire ownership of the masters of that record. And I would love to release that on vinyl. That has never been out on vinyl. And if ever an album did not belong on compact disc, it's that one. and I would love to release that on 180 gram, good thick vinyl, and really let it see have its day. And it's the thing about 180 gram is you have to be, I think, under 52 minutes And I think that record, I think that's like a 40-minute record or something. It's, it's like those very concise Buddy Holly songs. So
right.
I hope we get to do that. That'd be a really neat deal.
Yeah, we'll tell you one last note on that album. Buddy of mine is also a Holly fanatic. And so when I got this, because actually the label sent it to me, and as soon as I got it, I responded. So I told my buddy, Mike Danny, you got to listen to this. So I played for him, and he is very apprehensive of anything that is, imitation or doesn't, do Buddy proud. And the next time you came through Fitzgerald's, actually promoting that record, he saw that you were going to be there before I did. And he calls me, he's like, Monty's coming to town. I want to go. We got to go.
Fantastic.
So
one of the best compliments I ever got on that record, but particularly Don't Know a Thing About Love, was over the years, you get to do a lot of neat things, and I'd gotten to be real close with J.I. Allison, Buddy's drummer, Jerry Allison.
Mm-hmm.
And J.I., wrote That'll Be the Day and Peggy Sue and Think It Over and Tell Me How with Buddy. He and Buddy also wrote Not Fade Away, even though he's not listed as a writer on that. But I sent J.I. that record, and he called me and he said, man, I love the record. You really did a good job. He said, boy, that first song on there, meaning Don't Know a Thing, he goes, that's not quite Call the Lawyers, but it's almost Call the Lawyers. So he said, man, you nailed the cricket sound. So that made not a better compliment than that.
I was just going to say, you are not going to do better than that.
No.
So now the second album, Here I Am.
Yeah.
On that one, you kind of had, like a little 60s Memphis kind of vibe with the keyboards and some of those tracks.
Well, thank you. We've been touring the first record so much that so much of Here I Am was based on just listening to the audience and understanding what they thought worked, and so that there's a lot of Memphis type stuff on that, a lot of Blue-Eyed Soul type of, very, very Young Rascals type of movements and sounds on that. But yeah, I would say the Young Rascals grooving was really something that was turning me on at that time, and so I was wanted to write things in that vein, and some of the Tommy James and the Shondells, more soul type stuff. And then for me, it's like I'm an enormous, any era, I don't care what you're talking about, I'm an enormous fan of the songwriting of the Bee Gees. But their early stuff, particularly, To Love Somebody, is just always, without fail, just turns me on. It's just a straight up song and a record. So a lot of the influences of the, any of that Blue-Eyed Soul, the Young Rascals or the Bee Gees, the early Bee Gees, was what I was trying to express and push the envelope a little bit just beyond the Holly and the Rick Nelson.
Yeah.
Just as a writer, because I knew I had, in regards to those songs, I just wanted to see if I could grow as a writer and take those influences of Holly and the Everlys and Rick Nelson and maybe take it to that next place. And I think Here I Am is a real good continuation of that. And just for whatever reason that, you just look at it and it's almost like looking at a painting or a sculpture. The same amount of work went in it, the same players are on it, but for some reason, Here I Am doesn't have the magic of the first record, and only the gods know why. But it's a real good record. I mean, I'm proud of it. There's nothing I would change about it. It is as good a record as that record was going to be, but it doesn't have the sparkle, nor has it had nearly the legs that the first record did.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those growth records.
Yeah. And it didn't, for some reason, I don't know why but what we were, I remember at the time I went, well, Buddy Holly, meaning Holly's March of '58 record. I said, well, Buddy Holly's not quite as good as the Chirping Crickets, but maybe that's what this is. Or maybe not. But anyway, I remember that. I remember saying that.
Well, you followed that up with Stranger to Me Now.
Yeah.
And on that, you wrote several songs with the guy who's a friend of our show, Bill Lloyd.
Ah, yes. What a brilliant writer. What a brilliant man. The guy makes Santa Claus look like a prick. Oh, he's just brilliant. He's incredible.
Yeah.
And I've known Bill for, I met Bill, Foster and Lloyd were going just about the same time as the Wagoneers. We might have been a little bit before by just a couple months or something, but we were all in that same, we were on tour together all the time. We must have picked, 100 dates with Radney and Bill. So I just, got to know him, and I love writing with Bill. Just a phenomenal songwriter.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned Don Everly before. The title track has got that Everly-esque kind of feel to it.
Yeah, it does. It was, that song "A Stranger to Me Now" that Bill and I wrote. We were monkeying around with all of those Beatle chords, because Bill knows all those Beatle chords, and I was it's so funny you would say that, because I was straightening a lot of those Beatle chords out, and Bill and I were talking, and he said, straightening those Beatle chords out kind of sounds like what the Everlys did on Love Hurts. And so we took his big, fancy, beautiful piano Beatle chords and straightened them out a little bit, like Boodle Bryant did on Love Hurts. And what you get is the song "Stranger to Me Now." So quite insightful for you, Michael. You go to the head of the class.
So, well, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, you with that, what other tracks of that album stand out for you?
Well, I really like "The Love You Promised Me" that I wrote with John Bettis. That's very soaring and it's very Roy Orbison-esque. And I was at a point in my life where I was really able to kind of discover I had a bit of a big voice, which I'd never really experimented with before. So I love "The Love You Promised Me." I love the song "Someday" on that. And then another Bill Lloyd co-write, the song "Another Try" is just a pretty little country ballad, But I'd made that record. I wrote that record, I should say, after I had gone through a, for me, very unexpected divorce. And so I was just writing all these heartache songs and blues songs. And, I'm generally an extraordinarily happy-go-lucky guy. So I'd never written that many sad songs before, but that's just, you write what you know, you write what you live. But I had just gotten signed to Warner Brothers label Asylum Records, and I was I wasn't ever pleased with the production on that record. I wasn't crazy about the producer they put me with. I mean, he was a great guy, a guy named Joe Thomas, great guy, lives up there in Illinois. Mm-hmm. But I wish the record could have been just a bit more stripped down for me. But at the time, I was personally such a wreck that I could hardly stand up, let alone stand up for myself. So
yeah, well, but records are a snapshot.
Yeah, they are. They're a snapshot of where you are, and I'm proud of that record. That record is exactly the way it needs to be. But I will say, like, I will over the years, I'll listen to some songs off of Good Fortune, or I'll listen to some songs off of Here I Am, or the album Stranger to Me Now, but I don't ever listen to those albums. Whereas actually, I'll listen to Stout and High, I'll listen to the first solo record, the Dangerous Few record, as a work, as an entire album. But that, that's just me. There a couple of months ago, I got this beautiful, beautiful email from somebody that Good Fortune was their favorite record in the world. And it's like, I'm not going to sit there and go, "You're a fool."
Listen to the first one.
Just exactly. What are you doing? And they told me why. And it made perfect sense. And that's what, that's why music's so subjective. And, I'm blessed.
Exactly. Well, I'll tell you, you mentioned before about being fortunate as a songwriter to have other people record your songs. Let's talk a bit about that, because there's some, you know, legendary names that have put Monte Warden songs to record.
Right. Well, it for me, first and foremost, not a performer, and I'm not a singer, and I'm not a recording artist. First and foremost, I am a songwriter. That's what I've always dreamed of being since I was a kid. Nobody in my family's in the music business, but for some reason, Michael, I would get a 45 and I would look to see who wrote the song. I don't know why I did that. It was just songwriters have always turned me on. And when I was like, I don't know, 1977, before I turned 10 years old, I discovered who Buddy Holly was, and from an episode of Happy Days, watching with my folks, and Fonzie mentions Buddy Holly, and I was like, well, who's that? And both my parents went, he was a singer. He got killed when we were in high school, but he was from Texas, and it had never dawned on me that there could be a rock and roll star from Texas. I was 9 years old. I knew there was Elvis, and I knew everybody else was seemingly from London or New York, And so here was a guy from Texas. And then I discovered, because once again, I'd already been turned on about songwriters. I looked on the record label that he wrote virtually everything, and that turned me on. So I've just, I got my first publishing deal when I was 18 years old. And then I've had a publishing deal ever since. I mean, Patty Loveless has recorded my songs, and George Strait, and Travis Tritt, and Josh Turner, and Carrie Underwood, and Bonnie Raitt, and of course Kelly Willis, Bruce Robinson, bunch of Texas artists, and George Jones. My gosh, George Jones and Merle Haggard have recorded my songs. So it has just been it's an amazing thing where these people that they could record any song in the world. They have access to all the great songs of the world, and they choose one of yours is a humbling thing. And every single time it happens, it's fantastic and it's exciting. You never get used to it. It's always, a combination of you have great pride and great humility all at the same time.
Yeah. Now, Desperately, George Strait.
Yeah.
How did you and Bruce come to write that one?
Well, I was going through said divorce, as a matter of fact. And I was really I was in a bad way, and I was drinking too much, and I was running around too much. And Bruce Robinson and Kelly Willis, they were married. They had just gotten married. So this is like 96, I reckon. And I was just a mess, and they were dear, dear friends of mine. And Bruce, one day he said, if you're going to be this miserable, the least we can do is make this shit rhyme. And that's exactly what he said. And so I went over to his house one day, and we just started plunking around. And if you know the song, if you listen to the song, he said, well, what are you thinking for the feel? And I said, well, I'm thinking kind of a Kathy's Clown thing from the Everly Brothers. And he said, well, I was thinking more of a Don Williams thing. And if you listen to Desperately, it sounds like Don Williams has recorded an Everly Brothers song. And it has the movements, that 1 and 5, 1 and 5, kind of like Kathy's Clown. And we recorded this song, and we knew right away it was good. We thought it was probably great, so we went in and we sang it for Kelly, which we hardly ever did. I mean, Bruce and I have written a bunch of songs together, and we sang it for Kelly, and she just went, guys, that's great. And I mean, and Kelly, particularly about songs, she throws around compliments like manhole covers. I mean, that was just like a huge, huge endorsement. So anyway, we just went on with our lives and made records and stuff. And fast forward several years later, I'm, by the grace of God, happily married to the love of my life, my wife, Brandy. And Brandy is third generation music business, third generation songwriter. Her grandparents wrote hits, her daddy, her uncle, everybody's written hits in her family. And she started this publishing company, which will be 20 years ago next month, as a matter of fact. So Brandy started her publishing company, and she said, we're out at supper one night celebrating Kelly's birthday. So this would have been October, I guess, of 04, maybe 03, 04. And Brandy said, I have a stupid question. How many times has Desperately been pitched to George Strait? Because it's perfect for him. And I just laughed. And Bruce said, I have an even stupider answer. None. And Brandy said, there is no way that song has not been pitched to George. It's perfect for him. And so literally, because this was several years ago, she burned a CD, put it on a FedEx envelope. And because she used to work at Decca Records, which was a subsidiary of MCA Nashville, she knew everybody there. She could get the song to George's producer, Tony Brown. So she sent Desperately up to George, and they were still looking. They had slot for one more song on his record, and he heard the song and he fell in love with it immediately. And I mean, like, seriously, he heard it on a Thursday, and I think he recorded it on a Tuesday.
Wow!
Just a few days, and huge hit for him. It was in the top 10 3 months. It was on the charts 6 months. It's been on 4 different George Strait million-selling records. Because of the George Strait recording, Josh Turner and Maddie and Tay have recorded it, and it just, the legs on that thing has it changed my life as a writer. I'd had received all this critical acclaim, which is wonderful and a miracle. But once you have a million seller on somebody like George Strait, it just becomes, none of it's easy, but it becomes easier for other artists to look at your song. They look at your songs as a hit maker and not just some critic's pet or something.
Right. I'll tell you, you mentioned before about being a kid, looking at, reading the songwriting, credit on the 45. What was the first 45 you bought?
The very first 45 that I bought was the very first 45 I bought was a green label. It was a Freddie Fender record that was off some little indie Texas label that I had heard on the radio, and it was his version of La Bamba, which was never a hit or anything. I mean, Freddie Fender was just a regional Texas act. But the very first album I ever got was 1973 Elvis, his Via Satellite from Hawaii live record. And it's a double album. And I was at Kmart, and my dad let my older sister go get a record. And I said, can I get one too? And he said, yeah. And I was 5. So I was old enough to get a record. And I was so excited, and I loved Elvis. And I'd just seen that Via Satellite from Hawaii just a couple months before. And it was a double album, and it was priced as one album. So I thought I'd be scamming the system a little bit, getting 2 for 1. And it was Elvis. And man, I remember it was in the era of the orange label, RCA. And I can to this day, I still have that. And I can remember just that orange label going round and round. I mean, like any other kid, I probably listened to that thing, 100 times. That was amazing. Yeah.
Were you a big record buyer, big record collector?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, growing up in Austin, there was so much great music, but also, by the time I get to be like 10 years old, 11 years old, there's particularly from the UK, and Austin could always get a bunch of imports. There was that neo rockabilly thing was starting to happen from the success of Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley and American Graffiti. There was still that 50s revival, and there was the first wave of American punk. Bands like the Nuns and the Dills really turned me on, and all over Texas was the outlaw movement. So it was just an extraordinary time to be living in Austin, Texas, and being around so much exciting, uncompromising music. And it certainly gave me between the punk and the outlaw movement, a complete disdain for authority of any kind that I'm taking with me every day.
That's not a bad thing.
No, particularly with the age in which we live, it's a wonderful thing to have. But that's where it comes from. When you're when you're, half Waylon and, half Johnny Rotten, that's what you're going to get.
Well, I'll tell you, talking about albums, we got to talk about The Dangerous Few.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I happen to have a copy right here. This album, I wrote everything on it. My wife Brandy and I wrote all but one song together, and it is about 10 years ago, 8 or 9 years ago, I started writing jazz for the first time. I'd always loved Sinatra and Dean Martin in particular, and Bobby Darin, and particularly my love of Darin was as a songwriter. Also, Darin and Mel Torme and Peggy Lee were the three artists of that genre of traditional pop that wrote their own songs. It's almost exclusively a vocalist-driven genre, whereas rock and roll and country, almost like a songwriter-driven genre. But this is known to the great vocalists Billie Holiday, Ella Fitzgerald, Sinatra, Dean Martin, and none of them wrote their own songs. But I was always turned on to the fact that Bobby Darin did write his own tunes, but I had never. It was just like a mental block. It's like, oh yeah, I don't know how to write those kind of songs. And when I was 19, when Harry Met Sally came out, and I remember thinking somebody's going to write new songs in that genre, and that's going to be bigger than Coca-Cola, and nobody ever did. And I didn't have the chops for it. I was just a kid. But as I became a stronger and more confident writer, and also there's the great John Lee Hooker quote: "There ain't but 12 notes." I mean, how different is it going to be? And I was always so turned on by True Love Ways and Raining in My Heart off the Holly string session, he did with the full orchestra. And I just want to take a stab at writing these songs, but I want a little combo, almost like the Wagoneers, like just a very edgy take on this type of music. And we started picking here in Austin, and immediately people loved this. People, they were very surprised that I was writing these songs. Like at first people were going, well, is it like Western swing? I said, no, it's just straight up jazz. But I open up my mouth and sang. It's going, you can tell I'm from Texas. And we recorded this record. And just like we did on the Watermelon record back in '93, I knew it had to be 100% live. So live takes, most of the record is either you're hearing take 2 or take 1. I think the only one song was 4 takes, and a couple of them were take 3, but they're all live takes. No, I mean no fixes. Obviously, Michael, no auto tuning of any kind. So it's just and the band at the time had a weekly residency every Thursday. So we picked, I reckon, a couple years. So that's 100 gigs, of just getting real good. And we just went into Arlen Studios, and we brought in our buddy Tim Palmer, who's did all the David Bowie records, and he did Pearl Jam's 10. So he's a brilliant producer, brilliant engineer. Mas Palermo once again was co-producing. Brandy, my wife, was co-producing, and our horn picker Eric Telford was producing. And I did not want to produce this record. I just wanted to just be the artist on it, the singer. And I just love the way it sounds. And once again, the reviews of this thing, it looked like my grandmother had written these things. And I was a little bit nervous because I hadn't put out a record in literally 20 years. And the first record I put out is a jazz record, and not only that, but the critics could have really taken me for a ride if they wanted to, but they loved this album. They got what I was trying to do, and they knew. One reviewer said the sound had never existed, and I was like, wow, we've been doing music for a long time, and that's how I felt about it. So. I've been real proud with how it's gone, and I look forward to. We're just starting to talk about doing the next Dangerous Few record. I don't know if we're going to do it in the studio or if we're going to do it live. I've never done a live record. I mean, live at a club like Sam Cooke live at the Copa.
Mm-hmm.
I've never done that before, and I would love the opportunity to just go record maybe 3 gigs, maybe 4. I think Sam did three nights at the Copa, and they cut the record to one album. But I'd love to do that, do the same set over 3 audiences and then put it together. But, we'll just have to see. But we have certainly Brandy and I have the next Dangerous Few album written. But hopefully some more songs will, come forth, and we'll, you always try to knock a song off, but having said that, I also don't believe in recording a brand new song, even though it might be great. I like letting a song get its juices and figure out how it goes in front of an audience. Like the classic. Okay, here's the classic story of that. Buddy Holly and the Crickets with Maybe Baby. They'd had Maybe Baby in Lubbock when they were playing the roller rink, and then the American Legion Hall, and then they rearranged it with that pop arrangement, and that's what they recorded. They rearranged it, went in the studio, recorded it, and then they figured out how to play it. And there's one recording of Buddy Holly and the Crickets doing Maybe Baby live when they were in England in March of '58, and it is so superior to the record, even though the record's perfect. The way Buddy played that lick on Maybe Baby live is a great example of why you don't go record something right after you write it. Give it a minute, because if you listen to Buddy's lick on Maybe Baby live, it has more to do with Roy Orbison's lick on Pretty Woman, which came 5 years later, than what you hear on the record of Maybe Baby. And Buddy and Roy were real close, so I've always surmised Roy probably heard Buddy pick that live and went, "Oh, don't mind if I do." So check that out on YouTube, because you go, my gosh, that's superior to the record. And don't get me wrong, Maybe Baby is a perfect recording, but it's even better live. So that's always been a template for me of don't just use any. I tell people going in to make records, I said, don't fall in love with some idea in the studio. Dance with the one that brung you, because you may hate that idea a month later, and then it's on your record, man. So that's my philosophy. I just like to, stay with the tried and true.
Yeah, I agree with you. Some things have to marinate before they're ready.
Yeah, right on. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, talking about Dangerous Few, some of the songs in there. Here, Kitty, Kitty.
Everyone loves Here, Kitty, Kitty. It's such a fun little tune. It is absolutely a filthy song. It's as dirty a song as you're ever going to hear. Dirty as anything Laverne Baker ever recorded, or Jackie Wilson. But it's people just love it. It's got that cool little guitar riff on it, and I think it certainly like if somebody asked me like what are the describe the Dangerous Few to me, I would either play them the song Black Widow off the album, or I would play them Here, Kitty, Kitty. But like when we do Here, Kitty, Kitty live, sometimes it depends on the audience. Sometimes that thing's 10 minutes long. I just know to just let the boys keep taking a ride, because the audience just digs it, man. But thank you for asking.
Well, I mean, it's just got that vibe. It's just there's some songs that just lend themselves to live performances.
Right on. Yeah. Yeah. And obviously that, and there was no other, it would have been a travesty to record a song like Here, Kitty, Kitty with overdubs and fixes. And, it's just, it would be doing it would be disrespectful to the fans and the song to do it that way.
Right. Well, how about Not Since Love Came Along?
That song, Brandy and I wrote, it's got just a very complex, for me anyway, jazz pop chord progression. It goes, whereas like in country music or the blues, like you use the 1 chord and then the 4 chord. And this thing goes between the 1 and the flat 7/9. Not to get too in the weeds, but it just it's a very sophisticated chord progression. But the subject matter was there was this beautiful man with whom I used to go to church named William Brooks Sr. And he was the senior deacon at my church. And And he was an old man, like literally his grandmother was born a slave. I went to an all black church for years. So Brother Brooks is, he just had a great perspective on life. And if you would ask him if he liked something, and he loved Brandy's cooking. So we'd have him over for supper, and I'd say, Brother Brooks, you like those chicken and dumplings? And he would say, well, not since love come along. And he said that, and that was such a cool phrase. I'd never heard it before. And so after he passed, Brandy and I would just say, we got to write Not Since Love Come Along. And we knew it deserved a real special vibe. And so when I was monkeying around on that chord progression, we just realized that had been the chords we'd been waiting on to write Not Since Love Come Along. And his family loves that song. Brother Brooks's family is so proud of that tune, and they think it has forever put their dad and grandpa in showbiz. So, and we actually named our son Brooks after Brother Brooks. So it's, we're all family, so it's really cool.
That's great. Well, tell me this, Monty, is there anything that we haven't covered yet that we need to?
No, man, I'm just grateful to be visiting with you. I'm so glad we got to talk so much about Holly. When did you get that the Buddy Holly Story album? When did you get it? And is it on Maroon or is it on the Rainbow label?
It's on the Maroon.
My man, first pressing.
That was actually my dad's.
Wow.
And I swiped it from him back. Geez, I had to be about 8 years old. And he had 2 records that I swiped from him. Well, I take that back. There's more than that, but there were 2 that I had 2 turntables as a kid, and there was actually three turntables. On 2 of those, I didn't change the album for like about a year. One album was Buddy Holly's Story, and the other one was Dwayne Eddy's Have Twanging Guitar Will Travel.
Wow, yeah, that's great.
And
that's
then,
great.
But he was also, he was a huge Holly fan. Yeah.
Well,
and then
like that record. I'm sorry, go ahead, please.
No, go ahead.
No, that record, Holly was killed obviously February 3rd. Carl released that February 20th. 17 days later, they got the artwork done. They got the pressing. They got Ren Gravitt to write the brilliant liner notes all in 17 days. Wow. And really, it immediately went top 10 when Holly had not even had an album chart before. So his death was a big deal, and it was in, front page news. But it wasn't until that album came out where critics realized the cultural significance of Holly. And because it had only been 18 months, there really hadn't been the time to reflect on the cultural importance of him till this album came out. And keep in mind, the Chirpin' Crickets album cover, they all look like a bunch of goobers. His Buddy Holly album, Norman Petty was such an idiot manager, he had Buddy take his glasses off, which is, that's like having the Beatles cut their hair or something, And this album cover solidified Holly's image with the thick, heavy glasses. It's a very thoughtful cover. And I have seen that album in so many people's collections that were kids, in the 50s. I think it was, I just read today, because today being the 3rd, that album was on the charts 450 straight weeks. And what is it? That's 9 years, 8 years. Mm-hmm. That's a long time to never leave the charts. That means all through the British invasion, all through, the mid 60s, that album's still on the charts into the psychedelic era. That thing's still on the charts. Incredible.
Well, the growth that he had as an artist, especially if you look at those Decca recordings in 56, up to what he was doing, in the strings at the Pythian Temple, to go from the Decca stuff at Nashville to True Love Ways.
Right.
In 2.5 years.
Yeah. Right. And also
that's just amazing.
And just as a songwriter is like, if you listen to That'll Be the Day, Peggy Sue, Maybe Baby, Every Day, those Not Fade Away, True Love Ways, those songs have nothing to do with one another. His songs did not sound like each other, yet all of them sound like Buddy Holly songs. So if you go, that is such stunning awareness of who he was as an artist, that he knew that he could write something like Words of Love and turn around and write That'll Be the Day and turn around and write Every Day and then write Maybe Baby, and yet still be true to himself artistically. And like, I don't know if you, the only record there were two records played at his funeral, Beyond the Sunset and I'll Be All Right by the Angelic Gospel Singers. And if you ever get a chance to pull up I'll Be All Right by the Angelic Gospel Singers, it's the same chord progression as True Love Ways. So that's where Buddy got the idea to use those chords. But what Buddy did melodically with True Love Ways, so often, and I think it's kind of just, intellectual laziness on their part. So many writers assume Norman Petty wrote the melody to True Love Ways because it didn't sound like anything Holly had written before. And what we know now is Norman Petty wrote nothing of True Love Ways. Buddy was able to take that gospel recording and make this timeless pop classic. And he recorded that October 21st. So he's been 22, 6 weeks, and he had that much growth. And just, it really, and for me, I think the fact that the last song he wrote was Learning the Game, he proved his best songs were ahead of him. I think Learning the Game was probably the finest song he ever wrote.
Well, yeah, two things. True Love Ways was my wife's and I wedding song. First dance. Two, when you look at how old he was when he wrote all these songs, I mean, it's amazing that, somebody that age has got a catalog that when you just go through it and it's just, song after song after song has become a standard, right, in the American songbook.
Well, it's, and I think he, if I'm not mistaken, even including the stuff that when he was kids with Bob Montgomery, you're still talking about 50 songs all told. And from the time they recorded That'll Be the Day in February 57 till when he got killed, you're looking at just under 2 years. And just that, so really you're talking about 25 songs there. And that body of work, there's got to be a dozen standards. And that's just that high output. And, he was also one of those few artists that, success bred success for him. The more success he had, the better his song writing became, and he, J.I. told me, and Maria Elena, his widow, did too, but J.I. several times told me over the years, they'd be doing something, just, hanging out and just monkeying around. And they would ask Buddy if he wanted to, maybe go fishing or hunting or something like that. And he would go, "No, man, I don't have time." And J.I. said, the way Buddy said it, it was like he knew he did not have time. He was always he'd just go back to the, the little woodshed they had there and with his acoustic guitar and write songs there and love it,
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, then in addition to the songwriting, though, look at the stuff that he produced. He produced J.I.'s record is Ivan.
Right.
And
probably that's his best. That's probably his best guitar solo too. On the Real Wild Child. That's a brilliant guitar work. He produced Waylon. He produced that guy Lou Giordano. He basically produced himself and also brilliant vocalist. Didn't sound like anybody else, and such an influential guitar player. You hear his playing. Forget the fact that all those British cats bought Stratocasters. I'm talking about just the way he played the guitar was so confident and aggressive that really pop music had never even seen it. Not even Chuck Berry's playing is as confident as Holly's. It's really something. It's like he invented punk rock right in front of us.
Yeah. Well, say it amazes me. I'm always in awe. Yeah. Because I'll listen to his music and then I'll listen to it on one level where it makes you feel good. and it takes you to a place that's, very comfortable. But then when you stop and actually analyze what he did, how he did it, in the time frame that he did, at the age that he did, it's just amazing to me.
Oh, incredible. And just, and you look at those guys, you look at, Bob Montgomery, Jerry Allison, Joe Malden, Glendi Hardin, Sonny Curtis, Mac Davis, later on Joe Ely, Butch Hancock, Jimmy Gilmore, all those guys, Glendi Hardin, all those guys were from Lubbock. And the one, the thing that they all had in common was they all had the same music teacher at Lubbock High School, which whoever she was, obviously she certainly taught people how to dream, but just that much talent to just come out of there. And but they say that so much of with Holly, because you look at the way he looked, and he didn't look like necessarily a star, though you can certainly see his charisma on a few of the clips, but they said he was just brimming with confidence, even when they were just in high school. And one time I was talking to Glendi Hardin about working with Elvis and working with Buddy Holly. And he said the first time he was ever working with Elvis, and Elvis just walked into the rehearsal hall. He said Elvis just entered the room. He said the first thing I thought was, wow, that guy reminds me of Buddy. Just charisma and confidence, because physically they have nothing to do with one another.
Right.
But the way Presley commanded a room was the same way Holly had commanded a room when they were just kids. And that never translated to photographs or film, but everybody that knew Holly talked about that confidence. And you certainly hear it. You just with that kind of cocky attitude on things like That'll Be the Day and Think It Over, just as a, very, very confident attitude that because his voice was so soft, you really don't realize how cocky some of those lyrics are, but just brilliant, so and perfect artist.
Yep, absolutely. Well, tell you what, Monty, is there anything else we want to squeeze in here before we bring this one to a close?
No, Michael, this has been fantastic. I sure hope the world will open up and I can make it up there to see. I would, or you come down here, please.
Well, we got almost 2 foot of snow in the ground here, so I'd be more than happy to.
Well, what's so funny is we have literally a 1/4 inch of ice on the ground, and you would think we were in Alaska. Everything's shut down. Everybody's flipped out. You can't get any groceries, and it's like, people, it got cold. Relax. But as soon as it gets nice for both of us, we would welcome you down here. And next time I'm up in the area, I will certainly give you fair warning, and I'd love to come hug your neck and buy you supper.
No, that'll work for me.
Right on, brother.
So,
and thank you for having me. This has been wonderful. Thank you.
Well, thank you. So, and on that note, everybody, we're going to bring this one to a close. We've had Monty's social media and everything where you can get the Dangerous Few album up and follow him on Facebook and Twitter and wherever else. So please do go check that out. And until then, everybody, have a good night. Monty, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Michael. Be well.
This has been Music Night at the Majestic with Michael Boswell. If you enjoyed this edition of Music Night at the Majestic, follow us on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, and at musicnight.net. Music Night at the Majestic is a copyright production of Starliner Media. Any use of the accounts and descriptions of this program, its audio or visual content, without the express written consent of Starliner Media is prohibited. Thank you for joining us this evening. We'll see you next time for Music Night at the Majestic. This is your announcer speaking. Starliner Media.